Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, a way too early discussion around the positions that we would like to see the Miami Hurricanes potentially address in that spring transfer portal window. And I think I understand this is a very early conversation surrounding the spring transfer portal window. There's no debate about that. But I think it's a really interesting conversation for a couple of different reasons. One, we can kind of use this to kind of gauge where this Miami Hurricanes roster is at right now and what are the biggest, question marks that we have going into spring practice. But I also think it's a really intriguing conversation because you look back at how we talked about this team 12 months ago at this time. We were, very confident that this Miami Hurricanes team checked a lot of boxes heading into 2024. But there was one box that, we largely, all of us, kind of felt that it wasn't really checked, and that was the secondary. And the secondary for Miami in 2024 seemed to be the difference between a team that, won 10 football games, had a very good year, and a team that wins an ACC championship and is very dangerous in the college football playoffs. If you're Mario Cristobal and you're the Miami Hurricanes, you know you're going to have a good football team going into 2025. This team has the quarterback play. It has the offensive line play. It checks a lot of the boxes of which you are looking for elite college football teams heading into a college football season. What are the questions that we might need to see answered in the spring transfer portal window to make Miami the completest team they can be? That's the conversation I want to get into. Couple of different position groups I want to talk about. We'll also talk about some names that Miami could potentially be looking at. Now, before we get into it, as always, to the Miami Hurricane fans, it just can't thank you guys enough. Whether we're talking the high school recruiting trail, whether we're talking the portal, whether we're talking this team in the college football season, the amount of support y'all continue to show to the fellas, it means the absolute world. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, let it fly in the comment section in terms of position groups that you have the biggest concerns about heading into spring practice, heading into that spring transfer portal window, because what y'all say in the comment section largely going to drive our conversations around Miami during that spring practice window. Appreciate you guys. Let it fly in the comment section. Without further ado, let's get into it. Now, to me on offense, there's just not that many boxes that are left unchecked. You feel great about the quarterback room. You feel great about the running back room. You feel great about the offensive line, not only in terms of your starting five, but also the depth that you have in this program. The one position that I look at and say maybe you have some concerns about, and at least monitoring in spring practice, is the wide receiver position. And I'll start with this. I'm a fan of what Miami did in the winter transfer portal window where, they had guys like Eric Singleton. They had guys like Zachariah Branch come on campus. And you kind of knew at that point, with the lack of quarterback play Miami had at that point, they were probably going to have to outbid every other program in the country to land those kind of wide receivers. Miami didn't do that. Instead, they focused on getting a guy like Carson Beck and addressing some other positions on this roster. Going into the spring transfer portal window, this program has become much more attractive to wide receivers in the portal. If you are a Zachariah Branch, if you are Eric Singleton, where you are looking at with your pro, you want to make sure you have good quarterback play to whatever program you want to go to. Miami really didn't have that until they landed Carson Beck, which made it very, very difficult for Miami to recruit wide receivers to this program out of the portal. Going into the spring transfer portal window, having a guy like Carson Beck, having an offense that was extremely good in 2024, now the quarterback play is going to be damn good in 2025, it puts them in a different position in terms of what wide receivers they can attract in the portal. I think secondly, I'm also a fan that you didn't grab one in the winter portal window because, hey, let's give JoJo Trader and Ray Joseph and Nikar and Chance Robinson, Malachi Tony, Joshua. Let's give these young wide receivers that are coming into this program and coming up the pipeline, let's give them the opportunity to show that maybe they can be the guys for Miami heading into 2025. And if you come out of spring practice saying, hey, maybe we're another year away from JoJo Trader being that wide receiver one. Maybe we're a year away from Nikar and Chance Robinson really contributing for Miami. then you can go grab a wide receiver. But giving your young kids that you recruited out of high school the opportunity first to go out and show what they can do in spring practice, to me, that makes a lot of sense. Now, if you are coming out of spring and saying, because at the end of the day, as we sit right now, there's really one proven commodity in CJ Daniels in this wide receiver room. And again, that's not saying JoJo Trader, Nycar, Chance Robinson, Malachi Tony, Ray Joseph. That's not saying they can't be those guys. But right now, we don't necessarily know what they'll be in 2025. If you come out of spring saying, hey, we probably want maybe one more proven commodity difference maker in the wide receiver room, you can probably go make that happen. Now, there's a couple of names that I would at least keep, and this is really early. Again, we don't really know what wide receivers. I'm guessing that there will be a few big name wide receivers that hit the portal in that spring window. I would project that Miami, if they want to, will be a player for those guys. Couple names that I would keep an eye on. One, Cam Camper. I really like this kid from Boise State. He's actually currently in the portal right now. 6'3", 200 plus pounds. JUCO guy, went to Indiana, was pretty productive on a very bad Indiana team. Then goes to Boise State, catches for over 900 yards in the 2024 year. Obviously, a college football playoff team, was the leading receiver on that team. That one would make a lot of sense. That bigger bodied possession wide receiver that Carson Beck will get the football to. And then another one that I think has a little bit higher of a ceiling and a little bit more of a younger cat is Jace Brown. And there was some, one, he's from Florida. Two, there were some rumors that he was going to hit the portal in the winter months, caught for over 800 yards as a true sophomore on a Kansas State team. That passing attack with Avery Johnson wasn't what we thought it was going to be. There is some higher upside here with a guy like Jace Brown, three-sport athlete coming out of high school, really under-recruited in the state of Florida in that 2023 class. These are kind of some, I guess you'd say, smaller names. I do think that if you see a bigger name hit the portal, I would guess that Miami becomes a very big player if they want to, for a big fish in the wide receiver market in that spring transfer portal window. But that, on the offensive side of the football, like it's really the only spot that you could see Miami address. And what makes me so excited, look, if there's a position that is easy to address, it's the wide receiver spot. Miami's in a good spot where they don't need to go hunting for offensive linemen because they have a nice pipeline of young, talented offensive linemen. You feel good about where Miami is on the offensive line. So Miami's in a unique spot where they only have to really address the wide receiver spot, at least in my opinion, on the offensive side of the football. And that's a position that's pretty easy to address, especially when you have a quarterback like Carson Beck. Moving over to the defensive side of the football, there's really, to me, only two, maybe three positions that you're looking at. You start up front on the defensive line. You're probably in an evaluation period with guys like Justin Scott, with guys like Artavius Jones. I think you know what you're getting with Ahmad Moten and David Blay. Ahmad Moten played really good for Miami down the stretch. Justin Scott, Artavius Jones, you're using that spring practice window to say, hey, are they going to be guys that can play a lot of football and impact the game at a high level for us in 2025? If that's not the case, maybe you go out and address the defensive line, but I feel pretty comfortable in terms of what you have on the defensive line heading into the 2025 year, because then you even look at the edge and say, Hayden Lowe coming in as a true freshman, Booker Pickett, Marquise Lightfoot, Armando Blunt going into year two. It's just a numbers game. And if I'm a Miami Hurricane fan, I feel pretty confident that some of these names are going to step up and be guys for Miami in 2025. The off-ball linebacker position is probably the other position where, look, I think you feel good about Wesley Bissaint. I think you are excited about what Bobby Pruitt, what a Darius Hayes can be going into year two. The one thing I look at and say I normally like to see an experienced off-ball linebacker, a couple of inexperienced off-ball linebackers in the room. Right now, you only have one with Wesley Bissaint. Again, it's probably, and this is why I love what Miami did in the winter portal window, where they're going to give the opportunities to the kids they recruited out of high school first to win those jobs and show what they can do. And then coming out of spring, all right, if you need to address that position, If Bobby Pruitt needs another year, Darius Hayes needs another year, then go out and grab a linebacker. One name that I would look at here is Jimmy Rolder. And why I mentioned Jimmy Rolder as a Michigan fan, one, I think he's a really good football player. But in that Michigan linebacker room, you had two guys that probably should have gone to the NFL draft that are coming back for one more year. And Jimmy Rolder's probably just going to be the linebacker 3 again. I think he's a starting caliber linebacker that's going into year 4 of his college football career that is behind 2 NFL guys. If Jimmy Rolder comes out of spring and says, hey, I'm looking for an opportunity to get on the football field more going into year 4 of my college football career, Miami would make a lot of sense. I think he'd come in and start right away. A guy that's played a lot for Michigan, but not necessarily going to start in 2025. The last position that I look at and say you might want to address, and this is where it gets really interesting, and this is probably one of my most exciting storylines here heading into spring practice for Miami, is how do you put the puzzle piece together in the secondary where you bring in 4, in my opinion, difference makers at the cornerback spot, along with OJ Frederick coming back for year 2. To me, you got 5 really good cornerbacks. Well, you can only play 2 boundary cornerbacks and 1 nickel. How do you try to get all these 5 guys on the football field? What I'm looking for is, hey, do we move one of these cornerbacks to the safety spot? Do you move Charles Brantley maybe to the nickel, where I think he could be really good in 2025? Because I do look at the safety position and say, all right, Zachariah Poyser, stud, plug and play guy, no questions asked. Outside of Zachariah Poyser, it's question marks, right? And that's not to say Zaquan Patterson can't get better going into year 2. In fact, I would predict he does get better going into year 2. That's not to say Dylan Day can't play going into year 2, because he's another guy that I think Miami likes a lot. That could be a position where you maybe look for one more safety if you're not going to move any of these cornerbacks around. Look, the cornerback, I don't even think you can grab any more cornerbacks. You're so loaded at that position. I don't think you could get cornerbacks to come into this program. At the safety spot, you maybe want to add one more name. Add a guy that's played a lot, that has some upside. I look at a guy like Conrad Hussey, who I love coming out of high school, goes to Florida State, doesn't play great his first 2 years, but I don't mean that the Florida State program, nobody played good. And so I'm not necessarily putting it on Conrad Hussey. I'm not necessarily saying, all right, Conrad Hussey ain't a ball player. I think he can play if you put him in the right spot. And so maybe you go out and get a guy that, you were after on the high school ranks out of St. Thomas Aquinas. We'll kind of see what they do there. But I do look at that safety position and say maybe there's a question mark about who's going to be the other safety starting with Zachariah Poyser. And it very well, I mean, you go through spring practice, oh, Zaquan Patterson took that step. Well, then you're probably good at the safety spot. Those are the positions that we are going to be looking at during spring practice. Ideally, the answers are already on the roster with some of these guys you've recruited out of high school the last couple of years. But if they aren't, these are the positions that I look at and say, I could see Miami trying to address in that spring portal window. And again, why I think it's so important is you made a really bad mistake not addressing a position group that you really should have last year in the secondary. Don't make that mistake again. If you have a position that you come out of spring practice with and say, we still have a question mark about it, go make it happen in the portal. Go try to answer that question, because if you can answer some of those lingering questions about your roster going into 2025, it's the difference between winning 10 football games and competing in the college football playoffs. That's kind of where I'm at with Miami. Really, really good roster. A couple of lingering question marks that we hope get answered in spring practice. And if they don't, make sure you address them in the spring transfer portal window. We'll sign out on that. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later.